Yeah, I think we're going to complement the previous panel. We're going to go a little bit deeper. And Mark alluded to the fact that, looking at the previous use case, the POC, it was voice-oriented. They looked at considering with sort of data on demand. We'll probably spend a fair bit of time talking about early-stage data on demand transactions using blockchain today, which, as he mentioned, is a proof of concept happening next week at our MEF18 event. From a selfish MEF perspective, we're seeing I'll talk a little bit about some of the work because it dovetails in with the blockchain work that the GLF has driven. Pierre-Louis commented that he wasn't too familiar with blockchain 6 months ago or a year ago, and I'm very much in that camp. And what we've seen at MEF is very much an escalation of interest in terms of how blockchain can be an enabler or a vehicle for supporting much of the inter-carrier automation work that we're doing. And so we'll talk a little bit about that today. And I'm not speaking on behalf of the GLF, but virtually every carrier that was up here today and earlier or now in the previous panel is involved with MEF inter-carrier automation work, which we're going to touch on a little bit. And the GLF is involved as well. And I hope to, by the time we get to Capacity Europe, hope to have some bigger examples of work that we're doing in the industry announcing that. So with that, we'll get started, and maybe we can talk about the your views, and maybe Louisa, I'll start with you because we want to go down a level from the previous panel. What do you see as being the leading use cases for blockchain in the carrier space, and not just the wholesale space, but we'll probably focus on wholesale a little bit more today.
Well, obviously you've already referenced it. The one I'm most familiar with personally is the GLF one that we've been working on with PCCW Global and Clear, and we've had a great partnership there to move that quickly. And thank you to both Clear and to PCCW for helping to move that along. I think settlement is probably the clearest use case at this point for the carrier industry. But there's all sorts of use cases that are going on across different industries that could dovetail into the carrier industry, given the type of business that we're in, which is about enabling people to, we provide the networks that enable this sort of technology to exist. So I think we're on the cusp of looking at more use cases. And
you mentioned Clear. You weren't on the previous panel, but maybe you want to just discuss the role that you played in the previous POC and sort of what you're continuing to do with the GLF now.
Sure.
By the way, don't count on me asking all the questions in order and so on. I like to throw things off and move things around a little bit here, just to keep you on your toes, right?
That's good. So thank you for this question. So we had the really amazing opportunity, thanks to these two companies, PCCW Global and Colt, to create the 3 phases of the proof of concept, starting in kind of the bilateral connection on historical data. Then after the first GLF meeting in Dubai, moving into a real-time integration, connecting directly into switches and rating systems, then showing a real-time proof of concept in Chicago 5 months ago, and then going and enlarging this to the multilateral proof of concept, settling millions of dollars around many connections with these 6 carriers that sat most of them here on the stage, and resulting in a state that we can see the industry saying, we think that this is ready from a technological point of view, or almost ready from a technological point of view. All we need is now to move forward and have the industry adoption. And we had the pleasure to work with all the carriers and with the teams, and getting to know the operational team, the security team, passing all the different complex and lengthy stages, and still being able to deliver on time, to being able to present it to the GLF on Monday.
Good. So coming back to the use cases, Shahar, I know that you personally drove, I think, a lot of the work on behalf of PCCW. Were you kind of in agreement with Louisa in terms of settlements being top of mind here?
Obviously, settlement is key because I think the beauty of blockchain is it does not only enable a technical solution, it also enables the settlement behind it or the commercial transaction that sits behind it. And on the wholesale space, obviously, wholesale voice was the Marcus mentioned that in the previous panel. It was the easiest solution to find because the industry is very much aligned around how to manage voice, how to build for voice, and we also are aware of the problems, and we figured out how blockchain can eliminate some of the alleviate some of the difficulties. But there are other use cases. So obviously, the first thing that comes in mind is mobile industry, because it's very similar to voice, at least in the voice sense. And then you have mobile roaming, and there are already some certain initiatives in the market that handle mobile initiatives by different bodies. I mean, it's not necessarily the same entity. It's not part of GLF, but we are aware of certain work happening in the mobile industry, which includes both voice as well as the additional wholesale transactions, such as roaming, such as SMS roaming, data roaming, not only voice roaming. And that basically brings us to data on demand, which I think is the use case we really are interested in. And again, as Mark mentioned, that is where we aimed initially. Reason being, with wholesale voice, the best we can achieve would be better efficiency, cost reduction, which is very good. I mean, in an industry that suffers erosion of margins, cost reduction is certainly a good thing to have. But if you look at data on demand, that is where we can actually have new revenue streams coming out of our infrastructure. Because that is where we can actually take our infrastructure, which currently is built on a fixed monthly basis, and we can start delivering services, billable services on demand. And I think this is key because we add a new dimension, not only cost savings, not only operational efficiency, we add the ability to generate new services that can yield new revenues.
Any comments?
Yeah, I think this is spot on. I think that voice is a good way to start and having a network fast. And we saw how the panel before us was very surprised from the fast results that they can get and the speed. And now there's a talk about a fast adoption and March 19 already in production. And having such a network is the basic structure that we need to add all these new use cases. So doing a bandwidth on demand, which probably we're going to talk about the proof of concept that we are doing in MEF 18 later on, is something that can run on the same network. Having the roaming settlement, both for voice and data, can run on the same network. There are going to be applications on the same network. And if we are even taking a step further, we can use other use cases for blockchain, like identity and mobile payment that can also run eventually on the same network. Once you have the root of trust and you have the big tier one carriers connected in a blockchain environment, you can then deploy more and more innovative services. And we cannot know today what are the new innovations and creativity that will happen once we have this setup in place. And this is why the idea to go for voice by these two companies was a very, very good idea to enable a fast adoption in the market.
Yeah. The identity one, I think, is really important when it comes to on-demand services, because we already know that SIM identity is a problem. It's not Colt space, but SIM identity for roaming and things like that is definitely a problem. So blockchain absolutely has applicability there.
Yeah. And touching on that, we didn't speak about fraud prevention. But working with blockchain already with the current use cases, we identify several possible solutions for a very old and big and existing fraud problems. So I think fighting fraud is a big issue that can be resolved using blockchain.
So the companies here are very familiar with the MEF work that we're doing in the intercarrier area. But I just want to throw a little bit of a primer out here because we kind of just brought the data on demand topic into the conversation. So the big, and it is data on demand is a use case that we're seeing for much of the different aspects of MEF work right now. So the big challenge that we're trying to solve is, if you saw maybe yesterday, Orange announced Ethernet now. AT&T has Ethernet on demand. Colt has something else. And they can offer these on-demand services, being able to turn connections up and down, throttle bandwidth, et cetera, et cetera. They can offer them quite elegantly within their own network. Then you go outside your own network, and you want to offer it across a provider to a wholesale provider. It's very difficult. So what MEF has done is we've put together a framework for inter-carrier, cross-carrier orchestration. We're building APIs addressing all aspects of the services lifecycle, and the standardization of which Shahar actually led over a number of years in MEF. But what's interesting is the first use cases and the biggest business requirements for the work that we're doing for APIs and so on is really at the front end of the life cycle, quoting, inventory, ordering. But what we're seeing on the blockchain side is we're looking at it, we're tackling both ends now because it's really more on the settlement and billing side. So that's kind of interesting. The toughest part is actually going to be in the middle, where there's an automation of the service provisioning itself and service assurance and getting analytical data passed on to the initiating service provider and so on. So how do you, so that is interesting to see how there's going to be this kind of movement to the middle at some point in time. How would you explain, maybe Louisa, how would you explain the relationship with the MEF work that's going on, inter-carrier APIs and blockchain?
It's absolutely complementary. There's no reason why we can't continue to work together to co-develop, all of this stuff to do exactly as you're saying. They're two ends, they're converging into the middle, and we collaborate to then solve that middle piece. So they're absolutely complementary.
Shahar, you've been involved with stuff for a long time.
Yeah. So first thing, you did mention the POC next week, which is indeed a place where we converge both technologies. We converge APIs on the inventory and ordering side, quoting, and we're using blockchain to handle the settlement. They both are part of the life cycle. Which, obviously what we do what we do not do at the POC is the actual provisioning of service on the network. We said, we already know how to do that. And as you've mentioned, AT&T and Colt and others each have their own automation platform that already allows them to automatically deliver services on their own network. The challenge is and always was to orchestrate that across multiple carriers because, most services are not starting on your own network. Most of them either start on someone else's network or end on someone else's network, and there may even be transit cases. And orchestrating that across multiple carriers is the real challenge. So what the PLC does not do is actually orchestrate. What you do is we actually develop a way to explore availability of services through catalogs across multiple carriers. So once you identify the customer's requirement, you're now able to query catalogs in sequence and find the right path or the best path in case there is more than one path available. And you can optimize that based on either price or latency or number of hops or whatever criteria you want to optimize. And then you select your chosen path and you create the orders. Obviously, this is backed up by the financial side of what is the cost, how is markup being done, and eventually, we mock up the delivery and we mock up the service itself, and eventually we send an invoice, which is settled through blockchain. So I think this actually brings a new perspective to blockchain because so far blockchain has been treated and is considered to be primarily a financial tool. A tool that is used for financial settlement. And now we actually see the benefit of using distributed ledgers to go beyond just the finance, to actually go and explore inventory and optimize path and find other operational aspects of the life cycle where blockchain can be fused. The fact that it is distributed without a centralized management entity on top very much resembles the way wholesale carriers do their business. It's distributed without a centralized carrier sitting on top. So there's a perfect match here between blockchain and wholesale activity. And settlement is just part of that life cycle, but obviously we're proving that it can be used in other elements of the service as well, of the life cycle as well.
So Eran, you're doing a lot of the technical work for the POC with the various carriers involved. Maybe you can, just coming back to my original question, maybe you can comment on how you know, maybe talk a bit more specifically about what the POC is going to show and how you're using the MEF work.
Absolutely. So I start by saying that the POC started in the conversation Shahar and myself did, which all I did is just to listen to Shahar explaining what we need to do. And now we are here, I think, 5 months later, and this is working. So I'll try to give first kind of the more broader vision of what this can do. The idea is that all the future services of 5G, when you want to have them in the inter-carrier environment, you would be able to source them on an on-demand basis and to have kind of a cascade environment. So if you want to have a VR session between London and Shanghai, and you want to have them in a specific room that you want to buy from another content provider, and you're going to have 5 different companies providing connectivity, last mile, and software and transcoding, you could have all these catalogs being enabled to buy on demand. You can get on-demand quoting, how much it costs for every segment, and then one company can get these quotes and offer this service to the customer. And then when the delivery is happening, this being captured by the settlement layer, and then the invoice is done automatically immediately after that, and the billing is done and the money is being transferred to each of the participants based on what they contributed and based on what they quoted. And what we are showing in the POC, we have, so beside PCCW Global, we have also Tata Communication, and we have Single that joined, and we have Sparkle Italia and CBCcom and Liquid, and we show how each of them can expose their own product catalog, and we can see this real-time quoting and then real-time execution of the service, capturing the delivery, and then issuing an invoice and getting paid, all done in an on-demand, super fast basis. And this is kind of the basic infrastructure that will allow us all these next-generation on-demand services and can take the telecommunication industry in general kind of a level up in the value chain in enabling selling these specific services, quality of service guaranteed, aggregated services on demand that could be a huge gain in potential of revenue in areas like VR/AR, like connected cars, remote surveillance, remote machinery, so many use cases that have potentials of hundreds of billions of dollars into the telecommunication industry, and this is an infrastructure that can enable all that. And what I hope that our next year proof of concept will be, which what I wanted in the beginning, is to actually have this VR sessioning happen in 2 places in the world with actual provisioning and with the settlement layer, and I hope we'll get there as well.
So Louisa, in your role, you'd be, I assume, quite interested in the financial aspects, the implications on your organization. And you know, we heard in the earlier panel a discussion about how we can maybe accelerate cash transactions and so on. It's a good thing. Is it an OpEx play in general here? Is it just more of improving the way you do business, so on and so forth?
I mean, there are benefits well, I actually argue whether there are benefits from an OpEx point of view. I think what any new technology or any disruptive technology does, yes, it may remove some of your OpEx, some of your people costs, for example, but then you need to bring new skills into the business anyway, and you need to fund new forms of technology. So for us at Colt, it's not really about cost efficiency as such. It's about quicker revenue realisation. It's about the ability to detect disputes or discrepancies much quicker in the cycle, so therefore we can deal with them a lot sooner. That's kind of the efficiency that we talk about rather than purely OpEx and savings in that respect.
Now, are you looking at that from a wholesale perspective only, or is that also, from an enterprise-facing?
Well, both. I mean, we operate on both sides of the fence there. So it's really about both. I mean, the proof of concept that we've done is the wholesale space. But there could be applicability in the enterprise space as well. And we have a large section of customers that come from the capital market space, and we provide solutions there. So, and they're demanding that we look at these sort of technologies. They've been looking at blockchain and Bitcoin and all that space for a lot longer than we have, and they're looking at how we can help them to manage that as well. So we need to be in this space.
That was going to be my next question, whether you're seeing sort of demand from the enterprise side. Any comments, Shahar?
I think when it comes to OpEx reduction in terms of HR specifically, we don't see that. I mean, we see automation happening. We do not see reduction in HR, and there is a simple reason. It's not that, I mean, yes, we do replace tasks that were previously done by humans that are now done by automatic machines. But there are new requirements coming in because you have to maintain a software that runs it. So it's a shift of skill set, yes. We do see a shift of headcount from technicians to software engineers. But it's not that we're what we are able to do now is deliver much more with the same amount of people, or that is the growth of services which we deliver is much larger than the growth of HR, which keeps growing. In companies, HR still keeps growing. So the issue here is not it's cost cutting in terms of better efficiency, which means we do use less people per service in general if you have such a metric, but it's not that we lay off people. We still need people. We still need skilled people. It's just the skills are now slightly or vastly different than they used to be a few years before.
Yeah, I heard some carriers talk about their SDN implementations. There was supposed to be a big OpEx reduction and so on and so forth, but and they say, well, we didn't get rid of all the legacy people after we put all the SDN. We had to hire a bunch of new people. We didn't get rid of the old ones, so I wait for attrition to finally save some money.
At least on the voice side, we came up with a rough figure, saying that the industry as a whole spends about 10 years of HR every month resolving disputes. I can show you how we came to that figure. We figured out how many people work, how many people handle disputes in each company on average, and we multiplied that by the number of companies, and we came up with a figure. It could be 20 years, it could be 7 years, whatever, but every month the industry as a whole spends about an order of magnitude of 10 years of HR
so you've got good
resolving disputes.
To build your business.
We've been able to do that with a machine in basically 5 minutes. Yeah. So I mean, that's a huge cost cut. That does not mean those people are going home. That means those people are now free to do something more useful than just calling up other carriers and settling disputes.
Yeah, and I think some of the similar metrics are I'm not sure they're available, but we'll be investigating. What's the average length of time it takes to get a quote or place an order between carriers, and how will we be able to drive that down? I'm not sure we have all those metrics now, but we probably need to be drilling deeper to find them. Just one of the questions, I don't know if we can have time to answer the first one. If we have time, maybe we can back up on that. Could someone provide a very simple explanation of what blockchain is? Let's come back to that after. But because the second one sort of dovetails in a little bit with what you were saying, PricewaterhouseCoopers says that 45% of respondents in the survey think that that trust could delay adoption. And you're trying to sell this stuff, right?
Yeah.
So I'm sure you're hitting a few roadblocks out there.
So it's interesting. I didn't see the specific report, but basically what blockchain allows you is to walk in a trustless environment. So some people say that blockchain is basically a trust automation platform, and the reason for that is that you can work with different parties that you don't necessarily trust them. But since you use blockchain, you can enforce contracts that you agree upon, and you can rely on a single source of truth that is decentralized and enforced by the group. So basically, if you want to work with a company that you don't necessarily trust, what do? Every time you get an invoice, you're going to check it. And sometimes you're going to have mistakes, and then you won't trust that they didn't do that on purpose. So you start disputing with them, and you spend a lot of time doing that and arguing with them. Where you have a blockchain-based solution where you define before that how you're going to resolve the dispute, how the contract is going to be run, where the data is coming from, you don't have this dispute resolution, the manual dispute resolution. You just have less than 5 minutes of a settlement, including the dispute resolution. So actually, the specific use case that we are talking about now of settlement and automatic dispute resolution is actually enabling a trustless environment to have more trust using the technology. So it might be that some of these responders have kind of referred to what I had a call with a talk with a Japanese, big Japanese operator. And he told me that in Japan, they treat the blockchain somehow of a ghost. They don't know exactly why, they didn't find any problem with this, but they don't know it enough, so they have a trust issue with the concept. And I think this is just a matter of education. This is a matter of the first question that was here, what exactly is blockchain? And that's a matter of industry-wide participation, doing proof of concept, getting to know the actual technology, getting people from technical side, from operational side, from finance side, from legal side, to kind of actually work with this construct, ask all the questions, tackle the system until they gain confidence. So I think if there is a trust issue, all you need to do is just to go and take a step further into examining the technology and participating in an industry-wide consortium.
Louisa.
Just to add to that, I haven't seen the study either, so I can't comment on the specific study. But two things. I think it's a natural human reaction that we distrust new things. Change is not comfortable for a lot of us, so the natural inclination until it's proven is to distrust what you're seeing. But the second point, and I'm not an engineer, I'm not a technologist, I'm not a software person, I'm a commercial business person. So I go back to basic principles, regardless of what the technology is. Code doesn't replace good governance. You still have to have good governance that manages how you deal with it. And if you think that the technology can replace that governance, then you're starting from the wrong position. You still have to have that in place in order to get the best benefits from whatever technology, whether it be blockchain, AI, machine learning, whatever it is. That still has to be in place.
Yeah, it makes sense. You got to be doing it for the right reasons, right?
You kind of stole the words out of my mouth, but stole my punchline. But I think the issue here is not. I partly agree, or I would say I do not disagree with this statement, but I don't think the issue here is trust. It's administration. It's how do we administer the system, which basically determines how the market will react. The technology is there; it will work. There's no doubt in my mind that the technology will work. The administration is key. And administration, and through administration, you go down to details such as consensus mechanism and then the reputation system that sits behind it. If you're able to do those nitty-gritty things correctly, then trust will be gained. The real issue here is people not really. We saw one of the questions was, can we quickly explain what blockchain is? Well, given 3 hours, I can explain the blockchain down, from top to bottom, and you probably, whoever asked the question, probably understand how it works. But the key there is that it holds many aspects, and trust can be achieved through correct administration, which then leads to choice of the correct engine and the correct version, and then the correct implementation. So I would say I do not disagree with the statement, and I strongly support Louisa's statement. It's about administration. It's about how do we accept members to the club, how do we administer their membership, how do we maintain the reputation. Those are not done. Machines do the work, but the decision still needs to be taken by humans.
Makes sense. I'm actually going to go back to the questions on the floor here, maybe in a slightly modified way, but just coming in and looking at the vendor side of it. We have the OSS, BSS community. We have that sell off-the-shelf solutions, customized. We have substantial homegrown software that exists in carrier environments. We have, of course, the major open source projects going on here, like ONAP and so on and so forth. Are you an example of a new type of vendor coming in that's going to be disruptive, that's going to cause trouble for these big OSS companies, or Are you OEMing to them, or where do you guys see this thing playing out from a vendor perspective?
Good question. So when we came up to think about what is the right model for us to work in such a market and in other markets, what we understood is the most important thing is to have standardization and to have an environment where there is no vendor locking. So as we see ourselves, we are pioneering in this field, in the blockchain field in telecommunication, and we are going to keep working with all the POC participants and the newcomers to this environment to provide the best solution. But in parallel to that, we plan to work with standardization body, MEF is one of them, to try and come up with the interoperability standardization to allow multiple vendors to come up and propose their own nodes technology, or maybe just layers inside the solution, and to have open APIs to be able to allow integration on the node stack itself, and also interoperability protocols to allow multiple vendors to work together. And we think this is key for the success. To have a really resilient network that will give a lot of benefit to everyone, you need it to be a multi-carrier, multi-operator, multi-product, as we spoke before, and then multi-vendor as well. So we see ourselves as kind of a leading vendor in this area, but certainly not a single one.
So you're the thought leader, and you have to figure out how to make money later on, right?
Yeah, getting a good
I'm sure
market
you've thought
share
about that.
is good enough for us.
And Shahar, I know you're not. It's not your core responsibility at PCCW, but you're probably having discussions with BSS vendors, for example. And are they taking a position there, or are they stepping back, looking at this, trying to figure out whether they have to spend a pile of money to develop it?
First thing, BSS vendors today already start using the buzzword. So you hear the buzzword blockchain from various BSS vendors already, because they understand it's something that needs to be heard now, because it's out there in the market. There is this new word. We have to say that word as part of our message. I can say that when we received offers for blockchain-based solutions from BSS, from legacy BSS vendors, their rates were hard to consume, difficult to consume. Now, practically, the way it works today, since this is a relatively new technology, still young, it's been around for quite a while, but it got the attention only in recent years. Solutions today tend to be proprietary. But that's the nature of new technology. It starts proprietary, and then the industry needs to try and find a way to standardize or to form standards. I think one of the things I like about Clear for that respect is that they do say, yes, we need standardization, because the first thing a proprietary vendor would do would be to try and retain their proprietariness for as long as they can. I think this is the right approach, and we are now in an attempt to try and gather a few of the initiatives out there in the market to try and come up with a unified approach and try to look at what can we actually standardize. How can we try and abstract the definitions and then standardize around concepts, and then let vendors compete on certain elements or certain parts of the cake, and that is also where the big BSS companies will come eventually, because you need to wrap it all into a solution that integrates into your own systems. If they're managed by a traditional BSS vendor, they'll need to be involved one way or another, because they'll need to tie in the blockchain elements, or maybe the different parts of blockchain elements into your existing system.
And Louisa, I know you've got different initiatives going on with different vendors. What's the kind of Colt perspective on this? Are you trying to bring a number of players together in sort of a synergistic way or a competitive way? Is there a strategy there, or just some other approach?
I think we're at the point where we're experimenting. So you're right, we are working with a couple of different vendors, and you'd be aware we've got a separate proof of concept as well at MEF next week. And for us, it's about working out what fits. So we talk to different vendors about how we can collaborate, how we can bring different pieces of the puzzle together. And, you know, at Colt, we believe the sandbox is big enough for everyone to play in. It's not that some vendors have to get out. It's not that people will, you know, disappear. They can evolve into the new ways of working. The sandbox is, as I said, big enough. So it is about collaborating, though. You know, if we look at open source and things like that, to Shahar's point, if everyone wants to be proprietary, they will fail. I guess that's the answer to the question. If they demand proprietary, I just don't think they can be successful in the new world.
Before I move on to another question, I'll comment on the collaboration side, because you know the association that I run is, you know, really a collaborative group, and the current levels of collaboration, if you just look at POX, is unprecedented. You know, we have 50 companies next week in 19 POX, and so many companies are just wide open. You know, we've had technology-related POCs. Can you find us some service providers that would be interested? And we're bringing service providers from Asia, Europe, that seem to be interested in just getting into that sandbox and looking at some of these things working. You know, it's been quite an exercise actually to bring these 50 companies together. Sometimes the teams are formed, sometimes they're not formed, but we're certainly seeing proof of concepts move the standardization process faster, move it along faster, because people could see what the desired outcome is and make it tangible. So just a comment there. I'm going to ask Louisa on this one as well, and it's around the question is whether the telecoms industry is having a hard time finding software specialists, and I guess the skill shortage in general. There's a MEF survey that we're going to announce next week. Some data from, I'll comment on in a minute, but how do you see things from a Colt perspective? Is it tough to get the right staff? If so, which are the ones that are hardest to find?
This is a perennial question. I mean, I've been in this industry for more years than I probably care to publicly admit in this environment. And you know, finding the right resources at the right time is a perennial issue that the industry has been dealing with for as long as I've been around. And I don't think that's going to go away. As technology evolves, as businesses, we need to find ways to reskill our people and bring in new skills. And that is an issue. And I'm going to diverge slightly into a panel that I wasn't on yesterday, but listened to. Part of the problem in our industry, in my view, is that we don't attract enough women. And if you're looking at engineers, you know, the comment there is about being less glamorous than Facebook and Spotify, and that may well be true, but that doesn't mean that it has to remain true. You know, this is a dynamic industry that creates opportunity for people, particularly for women. If I look at my own case, I was born in a small country town in Australia, and I have lived in Singapore, I've lived in London. I get to travel with my job, I get to get involved in, you know, proof of concepts and new technologies and meet different people and different cultures and experience different things. And, you know, being in the telecom industry has enabled that for me. And I think we have a responsibility as an industry to look at how we bring up the next wave of talent into these sort of areas like engineering, and particularly how we encourage young girls to get into the field as well. So that's I'll get off my soapbox now.
That's okay.
My women in tech, but
and I would assume it
plug.
was sort of a non-blockchain specific question, but I would assume with blockchain, I mean, you're just not going to find a lot of people out there that have that expertise. You're probably just going to have to educate them, right? Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely.
Any other comments, Shahar?
I mean, first, I agree with the question. The answer to the question is yes, we do have difficulty hiring the right people. And yes, we are less attractive than Facebook and Spotify. But that does not mean we are unable to do so. We do find our ways. You know, one way obviously is to hunt people in the market. It's difficult, but it works. The other option is to outsource. to IT vendors who do the work for us, and it's their job to develop and hire the people. And the third choice, which we did, was to actually acquire a company with the people, with the skills that actually do the job. So we acquired the company with a platform, and then once the platform is already deployed on our own network, we now can take those people, the skilled people, and shift their gear towards other projects which are idling. Again, this is not blockchain specific. This is technology specific or generic. The problem exists. I'm not in HR, but I'm aware of the difficulties that exist in trying to acquire people. It's a difficult market.
A couple points there. Next week at our MEF 18 event, we'll have some snippets from a survey we just completed in partnership with one of the analyst firms, Vertical Systems, looking at where we're at with respect to adoption of intercarrier initiatives, MEF services and APIs and so on and so forth. And when asked, what's the biggest challenge or impediment to adoption here, and it was skills. It was the number. I forget the number, but it's by far the leading issue. That the operators are just having a hard time finding the right people. So it sort of brings us. Second point I'm going to make is we sat around at the MEF board of directors 8 years ago. And operators, this was back in the earlier days of a fairly heavy-duty ramp for Ethernet services. And the operators are saying, we have to operationalize this stuff. We have to get people off of these legacy things like frame relay and so on. And what we ended up bringing to market, but we don't know what to ask for. If we want to hire someone with Ethernet skills or if we want to train them, we don't have a framework to do that. So we ended up bringing out vendor-neutral certification programs to get people up to speed on those skills, and they've been pretty successful. So I guess in looking at the survey, I'm stepping back saying, well, I'm glad we brought those programs out and we're extending them because we seem to be addressing a pretty substantial issue. Not that I'm pitching our certification here, but just I'd never do that. Some companies, by the way, have, like CenturyLink is pushing around 900 certified MEF technical staff, so playing quite a role there. I'm just going to maybe open the floor here to some final comments from the panel, and we might finish up a little bit early. I usually think that most people don't mind that, especially when there's lunch waiting. But Eran, maybe start with you.
So I think what's happening now is very exciting. I think seeing the kind of wholesale community getting the blockchain solution from POC towards production thought is very exciting. Having that in parallel with what we do together in MEF and showing that it's not only cost saving, but this can create new product and new services is extremely exciting. And I think that the message to people here in the audience and in general in telecommunication industry is this is the right time to jump on this train and get your teams understand what blockchain is and what is the initiatives are doing and participate, take part, because this is going to transform this industry.
I would want to try and touch that from the perspective of MEF and technology and how MEF can actually take place in this new environment. MEF traditionally was developing service specifications, and a few years ago started developing operational specs as well, life cycle processes, multi-domain reference architecture, and I think blockchain can build on top of that reference architecture and vice versa. It's a two-way game. On one side, for blockchain to properly work, all elements need to be aligned. You need to agree on the ledger type. It doesn't really matter which ledger type. You need to agree on the ledger type. Everyone needs to run the same sort of software. You can have some different rules here and there embedded into the code, but you need to speak with each other in a ubiquitous manner, which is what MEF does very well. MEF does develop the IPS, the interface profile specifications, which define what information needs to flow between entities. how that information flows, whether that flows through APIs, which are currently under development in MEF, or if it flows as a blockchain transaction, is less significant. I think generally the really important thing is what information flows where. And for that respect, I think MEF is in a good position to continue the specification work and standardization work that it has been doing for years, and then building on technologies such as either APIs or blockchain or both, and there could be others as well, in order to deliver the interoperability between systems, between carriers. The reason voice worked very well in the first POC was because it's pretty much a unified process and a unified data model, whichever carrier you touch. They all use CDRs which look very, very similar to each other. They all use process which is very similar to each other. So transactions typically take place in a very ubiquitous manner across the industry. It was very easy to implement blockchain. And on data on demand, it's a bit more complex because we still work in silos, and the inter-carrier stuff is still not unified. Still, there are still too many discrepancies between carriers. APIs by themselves would not solve it. You actually need to work beyond APIs to also unify the way carriers operate and communicate internally, not only between each other, in order for blockchain and other methods to properly work.
Okay. And Louisa, just maybe a bit of a variation on the question. At what point do you see blockchain having an impact on your business?
It already is. So
you're beyond POCs, right?
We're heading beyond POCs. So the last panel, we talked about the initiative with the GLF. We're already pulling together a working team to look at governance structures, at frameworks, and how we implement that for the industry. I guess my message is simple in that Colt views itself as a challenger to the industry. That means we need to challenge ourselves as well. And we'll continue to do that with technologies and with blockchain, and we encourage others to talk to us as well, to challenge our thinking and the way that we do things. And in terms of the GLF, voice settlement, blockchain, very happy to talk to other carriers who want to get involved in that as well. The more challenge to the thinking and the framework, the better from our point of view. It's how we will get an industry solution implemented.
Very good. Well, thank you. Thanks to the panel, very informative, appreciate it. And to those of you that sat through this, thanks very much. And we'll break for lunch now.